What if the people you once considered allies, friends who stood beside you on your wedding day, suddenly turned their backs, shut the door in your face, and made it clear to the entire world you don't belong anymore? That is the humiliation Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are now facing as George and Amal Clooney, once proudly seated at their royal wedding, now make headlines for a very different reason. On the shimmering red carpet at the 63rd New York Film Festival in Lincoln Center, the Clooneys didn't just show up in style. They sent a message so loud, so cutting, and so undeniable. It left Hollywood insiders whispering and the Sussexes scrambling. Stay away from us. Imagine hearing those words from one of the most admired couples in the world. Imagine the sting. Let's be honest, just a few years ago, this scenario would have been unthinkable. George Clooney, international superstar, activist, humanitarian. Amal Clooney, world-class barrister, advocate for human rights, and one of the most admired women on the planet. And on the other side, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, fresh from their royal wedding, basking in global adoration, seen as modernizers of the monarchy. For a moment, it felt like a natural friendship. The glamorous Clooneys and the rebellious royals. Shared values, shared stages, shared dreams. Or so Meghan thought. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But here's the shocking truth. Hollywood's memory is short, its standards are high, and its tolerance for chaos is very, very low. Once you lose the shine, once the spotlight exposes cracks instead of beauty, the same doors that opened so easily for you can slam shut harder than you ever imagined. And Meghan and Harry are learning that lesson the hard way. Why does this matter right now? Because the Clooneys' appearance at the film festival wasn't just another red carpet moment. It was a performance of power, a masterclass in status. And the subtext of that glamorous entrance couldn't be missed. The Clooneys are here, they are thriving, and they are making it clear they want no association with the scandal-ridden Sussexes. Think about it. George and Amal could have ignored Meghan and Harry quietly, without making headlines. They could have allowed the illusion of friendship to continue, silently distancing themselves behind closed doors. But no. Instead, through body language, whispers, and quiet but deliberate moves, the Clooneys sent an unmistakable message. Enough is enough. Now here's the part that twists the knife deeper. Because reports suggest that Meghan and Harry weren't just passive observers of this glittering event. They wanted in. They wanted proximity. They wanted, desperately, to align themselves once again with the Hollywood A-list power couple who once validated their place in that rarefied world. After all, what could be more symbolic than sharing the spotlight at one of the biggest film festivals in New York City? For Meghan, the former actress who has chased Hollywood relevance with relentless energy, it would have been the perfect redemption arc. For Harry, it might have been a chance to stand beside someone respected, admired, untouchable. But the reality? They weren't just left out, they were pushed out. And this is where the humiliation cuts deeper. Because to be rejected in private is one thing. To be rejected in front of the entire entertainment industry, the press, and the whisper networks of Manhattan high society, that's a different kind of exile. George Clooney is not just an actor. He is a brand, a symbol, an institution. When he quietly distances himself from you, the rest of the elite take notice. When Amal Clooney, with her effortless poise, turns her attention away, others follow. Meghan may have once believed that her marriage to Harry secured her permanent access to this echelon of global celebrity, but the reality has become unavoidable. The Clooneys have declared, intentionally or not, that the Sussexes are no longer welcome. So what happened at that red carpet? Let's paint the picture. The Clooneys arrive, flashes erupt, reporters jostle for a glimpse, photographers shout their names. Amal, draped in flawless couture, exuding grace. Every inch the modern Jackie O. George, dapper, charming, his very presence commanding respect. It is Hollywood royalty at its finest, blending with political gravitas. A couple whose influence reaches from Beverly Hills to the halls of the United Nations. And somewhere, lurking at the edges, are Meghan and Harry. Not invited to join the center stage. Not part of the spotlight. Their presence, or attempted presence, turns from ambition to embarrassment in an instant. Can you imagine what was going through Meghan's mind? The woman who once walked red carpets herself, the actress who once thought she had cracked the code of Hollywood access, now watching as her supposed allies shine while she lingers in the shadows. Worse still, to hear the message whispered in unmistakable tones, "Stay away." It's a humiliation few could endure, and yet, for Meghan and Harry, it seems to be becoming a pattern. Here's the contradiction that makes this story sting so much more. Meghan has insisted, time and time again, that she is independent, that she doesn't need the validation of the royal family or the approval of Hollywood elites. And yet, every move she makes reveals the opposite, a relentless pursuit of acceptance, relevance, and belonging among the very circles that now reject her. Isn't it ironic? Isn't it tragic? For a woman who claims to define her own path, she seems utterly trapped by the need for validation. And Harry? Imagine being a prince of the United Kingdom, once second son of the heir to the throne, now reduced to awkward positioning at Hollywood events, hoping to catch the reflected glow of A-list celebrities. For George Clooney to tell him, directly or indirectly, to stay away, what does that say about where Harry now stands? What does that say about the choices he's made? But here's the real twist. The Clooneys weren't always distant. They once offered warmth, attendance at the royal wedding, public defense of Meghan when she faced media criticism. So what changed? Was it the Oprah interview? The Netflix docuseries? The endless drama spilling from Montecito? Was it the realization that associating with the Sussexes meant inheriting their controversies, their feuds, their reputation for chaos? Or was it something more personal, something behind the scenes that the world hasn't yet uncovered? That's the burning question, and it's the one that will keep people talking. Because this isn't just about one red carpet. It's about reputation, credibility, and the brutal truth of social hierarchies. In Hollywood, as in royalty, power is perception. And perception has shifted dramatically against Meghan and Harry. To see George and Amal Clooney making their entrance, heads held high, while Meghan and Harry scramble for relevance. This is more than gossip. It is symbolic of a wider cultural rejection. And here's where we leave the introduction, with the question that lingers like smoke after a fire. If even the Clooneys have turned their backs, who's left to stand with Meghan and Harry? If George Clooney himself has drawn a line, can anyone in Hollywood risk crossing it to support them? Or are we witnessing the slow, humiliating unraveling of Meghan and Harry's entire social standing? Because what came next, what unfolded behind the polished smiles and flashing cameras, would change everything. And no one, not even Meghan Markle, saw it coming. Were George and Amal Clooney ever truly Meghan and Harry's friends? Or was it all a carefully staged illusion? That's the burning question at the center of this chapter. Because when you look back at the timeline, the photographs, and the way the Sussexes leaned so heavily on the Clooney connection, it becomes clear that this friendship may not have been what Meghan wanted the world to believe. And that realization stings. Let's rewind to the wedding of the century, or at least what Meghan Markle thought would be the wedding of the century. May 19th, 2018. St. George's Chapel. Cameras beaming images across the globe. Every detail meticulously curated to show that this wasn't just a royal wedding. It was Meghan's crowning achievement. She wasn't just marrying into the Windsor dynasty. She was marrying into global relevance. And who did she make sure was seated prominently at that wedding? George and Amal Clooney. Now pause for a moment. Why would two of Hollywood's most respected figures, a human rights barrister and an Oscar-winning actor, be at a wedding for a prince and a former TV actress they had barely known? The truth is, George and Amal reportedly didn't have much of a relationship with Meghan and Harry before that day. Sources whispered that they had only crossed paths a handful of times. Yet suddenly, they were front and center, seated in the very same chapel pews as long-established royal relatives and lifelong friends of the family. Doesn't that sound more like a calculated move than a friendship? This is where the illusion begins. Meghan wanted the Clooneys as part of her narrative, her Hollywood meets royalty fairy tale. Their presence symbolized legitimacy. Amal's polished brilliance and George's eternal charm elevated Meghan's guest list. The cameras loved it. The press loved it. Meghan loved it. But did the Clooneys love it? Or were they simply too polite, too gracious, too experienced in the politics of celebrity to decline? That's the uncomfortable part of the story. Because while Meghan basked in the glow of A-list endorsement, George and Amal never once publicly claimed to be her close friends. In fact, George was asked point-blank in interviews how well he knew Harry and Meghan before the wedding, and his answers were cagey. He praised their love story, yes. He defended Meghan when tabloids swarmed her, sure. But when it came to depth of friendship, there was always hesitation. Almost as if the Clooneys didn't want to overstate a connection that wasn't really there. Think about it. Real friendships are built on years of shared experiences, trust, and private moments. Did Meghan and Harry share any of that with the Clooneys? No. What they shared was visibility. Meghan needed the Clooneys' aura. The Clooneys, in turn, knew the power of being tied, however briefly, to a global royal event. Both sides benefited, but benefits aren't the same as bonds. So why is this so important now? Because the illusion Meghan created at that wedding has been shattered. George and Amal's distance at the New York Film Festival wasn't an abrupt betrayal. It was the natural end of a relationship that never really existed. And yet, for Meghan, the rejection cuts deep precisely because she built her image around the idea that George and Amal were in her corner. She leaned on their prestige as a crutch. She dropped their names. She presented herself as part of their world. But the Clooneys? They were never fully invested. This is the cruel irony. Meghan positioned herself as the bridge between the worlds of Hollywood and royalty. But to maintain that bridge, she needed powerful anchors, friends like Oprah, Serena Williams, the Clooneys. And what has happened since? One by one, those anchors have drifted away. The illusion of friendship has dissolved under the weight of controversy, drama, and Meghan's relentless need to control the narrative. Now imagine how that must feel for Meghan. To have told the world, through guest lists and photographs, that she was accepted among Hollywood's elite, only to realize, years later, that the acceptance was temporary, conditional, and, in many cases, performative. Imagine how it must feel for Harry, watching his wife cling to these connections, only to see them unravel in front of cameras. Was the Clooney friendship ever real? Or was it always a glossy illusion Meghan sold to herself, to Harry, and to the public? Here's where we dig deeper. Why do illusions matter? Because in celebrity culture and in royalty, perception is everything. If people believe you're friends with George and Amal Clooney, that perception elevates you. It grants you access by association. But when the illusion breaks, when the truth leaks out, it doesn't just vanish quietly. It flips into humiliation. Instead of looking connected, you look desperate. Instead of being seen as equal, you're exposed as a hanger-on. And that's exactly the shift we're watching right now. Meghan and Harry are no longer framed as friends of the Clooneys. They are framed as outsiders, once tolerated, now dismissed. But the illusion of friendship didn't just end with silence. George and Amal's recent actions speak louder than words. By making a grand entrance at the film festival while keeping Meghan and Harry at arm's length, they didn't just avoid the Sussexes, they actively underscored their distance. It was a public performance of disconnection. And in the cutthroat world of elite circles, that's as close to an official statement as you can get. The saddest part? Meghan likely still clings to the memory of Amal at her wedding. Amal in her yellow dress capturing headlines. Amal symbolizing everything Meghan wanted to be. Sophisticated, respected, admired across borders. But memories don't sustain friendships. And illusions, once broken, don't heal. So here's the question for you, the audience. Do you think Meghan ever truly believed the Clooneys were her friends? Or did she know deep down it was all a show, a carefully curated act of convenience? Did she fool the world? Or did she fool herself most of all? Because if the illusion of friendship was already fragile back in 2018, what happened next would prove beyond a shadow of doubt. The Clooneys weren't just distant. They were ready to cut ties entirely. And when the moment came for the Sussexes to realize the truth, the humiliation was so sharp, so undeniable, that it still reverberates in whispers today. But what came next, when the Clooneys' rise collided with the Sussexes' fall, would reveal a contrast so dramatic, so brutal, that no one could ignore it. And no one, least of all Meghan, could escape it. What happens when two couples, once pictured side by side, suddenly stand on opposite ends of the global stage? On one side, George and Amal Clooney, who only seem to rise higher, radiating grace, success, and universal respect. On the other, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, whose every public move now draws whispers of desperation, scandal, and ridicule. The contrast is so sharp, so merciless, that it almost feels like a cinematic split screen. The Clooneys ascending, the Sussexes stumbling. And the real question is, how did it come to this? Let's start with the Clooneys. George Clooney, once Hollywood's most charming bachelor, has transformed himself into one of the most admired statesmen of entertainment. His career spans blockbuster films, Oscar-winning performances, acclaimed directing projects. But beyond the screen, he's cultivated an image as the wise, witty, politically aware voice of Hollywood. Then enters Amal Alamuddin, now Amal Clooney, a woman of extraordinary achievements in her own right. International human rights lawyer, defender of Yazidi women against ISIS, advocate at the International Court of Justice. When Amal walked into George's life, she elevated him from Hollywood heartthrob to global statesman. Together, they became more than a couple. They became a brand of integrity, style, and substance. Contrast that with Meghan and Harry. When they stepped onto the global stage as newlyweds, the narrative was full of promise. They would be modern royals, they would break tradition, they would champion causes that mattered. But 5 years later, where do they stand? Their reputation isn't of steady strength, it's of chaos. Multiple lawsuits, bitter feuds with family members, a Netflix series many saw as self-indulgent, a Spotify deal canceled, projects announced with fanfare, then quietly abandoned. Instead of building a legacy of substance, they've cultivated a reputation for drama, contradictions, and victimhood. Now imagine Hollywood watching both couples side by side. One couple consistently delivers dignity and star power. The other delivers headlines soaked in controversy. Which one do you think Hollywood would rather invite to its red carpets? Which one do you think A-list power brokers want to be photographed beside? And here's the irony. Meghan desperately wanted to position herself as Amal Clooney's equal. At the royal wedding, Amal's striking yellow dress nearly stole the show. Fashion magazines placed her at the very top of the best-dressed lists. Meghan, the bride herself, seemed overshadowed for a moment. And yet Meghan leaned into that connection, hoping Amal's elegance would rub off on her. She wanted the world to see them as friends, as peers, as equals. But the reality? They couldn't be more different. Look at Amal. She never seeks attention, yet receives it effortlessly. She doesn't need to tell the world she's a humanitarian. Her case files, her clients, her victories speak louder than any interview. Meghan, on the other hand, often shouts her causes from the rooftops, only for skeptics to ask, where's the depth? Where's the substance? Amal proves herself daily in courtrooms and international conferences. Meghan struggles to prove herself beyond glossy PR campaigns. Now, consider George and Harry. George is a master of navigating the media. He knows when to speak, when to stay silent, when to let his charm carry the day. Harry, by contrast, often rushes into microphones with emotion but little strategy. His memoir, Spare, while a bestseller, turned him into a figure of pity and mockery rather than respect. George's memoir, if he ever writes one, would be hailed as wisdom. Harry's was dissected as grievance. The gap in public perception is staggering. But here's where it gets even more brutal. Every red carpet event now becomes a visual metaphor for the split. At the 63rd New York Film Festival, the Clooneys arrived with regal poise. Heads turned, cameras flashed, and the press could not stop talking about their presence. They were framed as icons. Harry and Meghan, on the other hand, often make headlines not for what they achieve, but for who ignores them. Every photograph, every whispered slight, every cold shoulder reinforces the narrative. The Clooneys belong, the Sussexes don't. And that narrative matters. In elite circles, reputation is currency. Invitations aren't handed out of kindness. They're handed out because your presence elevates the room. The Clooneys elevate. The Sussexes increasingly diminish. Isn't it telling that George and Amal are still sought out for panels, honors, collaborations, while Meghan and Harry are accused of clinging to past relevance? Let's not forget another irony. George and Amal are older. They've had more years to build their influence. Yet they still project freshness, elegance, and relevance. Meghan and Harry are younger, supposedly just hitting their prime, but their relevance already feels exhausted. Doesn't that reversal make the fall sting even more? Now, ask yourself this. Why would George and Amal risk their reputations by staying linked to Meghan and Harry? What do they gain? Nothing. In fact, Association with the Sussexes now threatens to pull anyone into their endless cycle of drama. By distancing themselves, the Clooneys protect their brand. By shining brightly on the red carpet, they remind the world of what true power couples look like. And here's the contradiction Harry must face. He once embodied global glamour himself. The cheeky prince, the war hero, the royal rebel. He could have been a George Clooney type, beloved, charismatic, independent, respected. But the choices he made, and the controversies that followed, chipped away at that image. Instead of being seen as a man of substance, he's now often portrayed as a man controlled, adrift, lost. A tragic contrast to George's commanding, confident aura. So where does this leave Meghan? In the shadows of Amal. At events where Amal's very presence silences a room, Meghan's attempts to grab attention come off as try-hard. Amal wears understated couture and is called timeless. Meghan wears bold fashion and is accused of copying others. Amal is praised as authentic. Meghan is dissected as performative. These comparisons are cruel, but they are inevitable, and Meghan knows it. That's why this chapter matters. The Clooneys' rise is not accidental. It is the product of decades of work, consistency, and discretion. The Sussexes' fall is not accidental either. It is the product of decisions that prioritized spectacle over stability, victimhood over victory, and short-term drama over long-term credibility. And Hollywood sees it. Hollywood rewards the Clooneys with reverence. Hollywood now whispers about the Sussexes with pity or disdain. Which couple would you choose to sit beside at the Oscars? Which couple would you risk your reputation to defend? But here's the most devastating part of all. Meghan still believes she can claw her way back into Amal's circle. She still wants that validation, that proximity, that illusion of equality. Yet with every Clooney red carpet entrance, the gap widens, the comparison sharpens, and the rejection grows louder. And if Meghan thought things couldn't get worse, the next scene at the New York Film Festival would prove otherwise. Because while the Clooneys soared in the spotlight, what Harry and Meghan tried to do in the shadows would leave the entire crowd stunned and utterly humiliated. The flashes of cameras, the roar of the crowd, the velvet ropes pulled taut as the world's media braced themselves for the night's most anticipated arrivals. The J. Kelly premiere at the 63rd New York Film Festival was already destined to be a glittering occasion. But when George and Amal Clooney stepped onto the carpet at Lincoln Center, everything else faded into the background. It wasn't just an entrance, it was a masterclass in dominance. But here's the twist. Lurking on the edges of this spectacle were Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, desperate to reclaim their place in the Hollywood hierarchy, only to be met with a humiliation so sharp that it rippled through the entire event. So let's set the stage. Picture it. A crisp New York evening, the Lincoln Center illuminated in gold. The city alive with anticipation. This wasn't just a movie premiere, it was a statement of power, culture, and prestige. Attending this event meant you belonged. Attending this event meant you were relevant. For George and Amal, this was another night of proving why they are one of the world's ultimate power couples. For Meghan and Harry, however, it was a test, and one they failed spectacularly. The Clooneys arrived as if choreographed by destiny. Amal in a gown that glittered beneath the flashes, her elegance radiating as she glided across the carpet. George, every inch the leading man, charming photographers with his trademark smirk and easy charisma. The crowd roared. Reporters clamored for quotes. Every camera turned their way. It was Hollywood royalty meets global diplomacy, a couple whose presence elevated the entire event. And where were Meghan and Harry in this moment? Not in the spotlight. Not in the carefully lit photographs. Not beside the Clooneys. They hovered in the shadows, positioned awkwardly. Their presence felt, but not celebrated. Can you imagine the sting of that? Once upon a time, Meghan thought she would be standing right there, arm in arm with Amal Clooney, sharing that same spotlight, commanding the same respect. Instead, she and Harry were relegated to the periphery, as though they were uninvited guests at a party they had once believed was theirs to rule. Let's pause for a moment and ask the question, how did it come to this? How did Meghan and Harry, once the darlings of global media, find themselves overshadowed so completely, so brutally? The answer lies in the contrast of choices. The Clooneys have mastered the art of discretion. They know when to appear, when to speak, and when to let their silence say everything. Meghan and Harry, on the other hand, have embraced overexposure, tell-all interviews, documentaries, books. And now, when they try to stand in the same arena as the Clooneys, the difference is stark. The whispers began almost immediately on that carpet. Guests leaned toward each other, murmuring about how Meghan and Harry seemed out of place. Paparazzi, usually frantic for a shot of the Sussexes, focused almost exclusively on the Clooneys. Even seasoned journalists admitted the Sussexes felt like background characters in someone else's story. Isn't that a cruel irony? Meghan, who built her entire narrative around being the protagonist, now reduced to a footnote in the Clooneys chapter. But the humiliation didn't stop there. According to those who watched closely, Meghan attempted to edge closer toward Amal during the photo sessions. Body language experts have since dissected those subtle movements. The way Meghan leaned, the way her eyes darted toward Amal, almost as if waiting for an invitation to step into the frame. The invitation never came. Amal remained composed, radiant, and entirely self-contained. Not once did she extend a hand or signal for Meghan to join her. That silence was louder than any spoken rejection. And Harry? His body language told its own tragic story. Once a prince who could command an entire stadium, he stood awkwardly on the sidelines, hands fidgeting, eyes darting, unsure of his role. Was he there as a royal? As Meghan's plus one? As a Hollywood hopeful? No one seemed to know, least of all Harry himself. The contrast to George was brutal. George Clooney owned the carpet, exuding confidence, laughing easily, commanding attention with minimal effort. Harry looked like a man who had lost not just his crown, but his place in the room. Here's where it gets even sharper. The photographers noticed the dynamics, and photographers are ruthless. They didn't want the awkward shots of Meghan trying to insert herself. They wanted the glossy, perfect frames of the Clooneys. And so, the Sussexes were literally cropped out of history. When the images hit the press the next day, it was George and Amal on every front page. Meghan and Harry? At best, a blurry background figure. At worst, entirely absent. That's how rejection in Hollywood works. It's subtle, surgical, and devastating. But let's ask the bigger question. Why were Meghan and Harry even there? Sources suggest they weren't officially invited to the center stage part of the premiere. Instead, they tried to leverage backdoor connections, hoping to make an appearance, hoping to slide into the spotlight by association. Isn't that telling? A couple who once commanded invitations to the world's grandest events now reduced to maneuvering for relevance. And the Clooneys, whether intentionally or not, made it clear, you do not belong in our frame. Now, imagine the conversations after the event. High society insiders chuckling quietly over cocktails. Hollywood executives rolling their eyes at Meghan's attempted red carpet move. Publicists warning their clients, do not get caught in their drama. Every whispered remark reinforcing the same message. Meghan and Harry are no longer A-list, and associating with them is a liability. That's not just rejection, that's social exile. And for Meghan, the emotional blow must have been unbearable. She had built so much of her identity around these moments. The red carpet was her stage, the camera her ally, the applause her validation. To stand in the shadows while Amal Clooney commanded the world's attention was not just humiliating, it was shattering. Amal represented everything Meghan wanted to be: elegant, respected, admired for substance rather than spectacle. And in that moment, the contrast was unavoidable. But here's the cruel twist. The Clooneys didn't even have to say anything. Their very presence, their silence, their distance did all the talking. That's the power of true status. You don't need to declare rejection. You simply live in a way that makes the rejection obvious. Meghan and Harry weren't cast out with words. They were cast out with indifference. So here's my question to you. What's worse, being publicly criticized or being so thoroughly ignored that your relevance evaporates before your very eyes? For Meghan and Harry, that night at Lincoln Center wasn't just about one red carpet. It was a mirror held up to their new reality. They are no longer the stars of the story. And just when Meghan thought she might salvage something from that night, one moment of inclusion, one hint of validation, George Clooney himself would deliver a quiet but cutting rebuff that ensured the Sussexes' humiliation was complete. Because what happened next, what George is said to have told them, would send Meghan reeling and Harry sinking even lower. And it was a blow from which neither of them could easily recover. Why would two people who insisted they didn't need the royal family, who claimed they wanted privacy and independence, suddenly be so desperate to claw their way back into the good graces of Hollywood? That is the heart of Chapter 4, Meghan and Harry's desperation. And desperation, when played out on the public stage, is not glamorous, it's humiliating. Think about this. Meghan and Harry once walked into rooms, and the world bent toward them. They were novelty. They were disruption. They were the rebels of Buckingham Palace, the self-styled Diana 2.0, and her protective prince. Every move they made was reported with breathless anticipation. But that was 2019. By 2025, the sheen had worn off. Projects had collapsed. Friends had vanished. Invitations had dried up. The Sussexes, who once positioned themselves as the arbiters of a new era, found themselves standing outside the velvet ropes, knocking desperately to be let back in. And that desperation showed at the New York Film Festival. Let's peel it back. Reports whispered that Meghan reached out ahead of the event, sending signals that she and Harry would love to support. In Hollywood, that phrase often translates to, "Please, include us." But the Clooneys? They didn't extend the invitation Meghan so clearly wanted. Instead, they arrived in their own spotlight, making their own statement. Meghan and Harry had to settle for lurking at the edges, waiting for scraps of attention, hoping for a moment in front of the cameras. Isn't it astonishing? The couple who claimed to be building their own empire still found themselves chasing proximity to others for relevance. And this is where the contradictions become painful. Meghan had told Oprah, had told Netflix, had told the world, "I don't need them." She painted herself as the woman who walked away from titles, castles, tiaras. And yet, on that night in New York, she was visibly straining to be noticed by the Clooneys. Harry, too, couldn't hide it. For a man who once had an entire nation at his feet, his posture screamed uncertainty. He looked less like a prince, more like a schoolboy hoping for approval. So why were they desperate? The answer lies in their crumbling network. One by one, the Sussexes' allies in Hollywood have gone silent. Oprah, barely a whisper now, after lending her stage in 2021. Tyler Perry, supportive once, but noticeably absent in recent years. Serena Williams, distancing quietly, focusing on her own family. Even powerhouses like David Foster and Katharine McPhee, no longer photographed by their side. And then, of course, the Clooneys, who once attended the royal wedding, now radiating cold indifference. When every door closes, the few that remain become vital. That's why Meghan and Harry tried to edge close that night. They knew how important the Clooneys' approval would be to their survival in the A-list circuit. But here's the irony. Desperation never attracts. It repels. The more Meghan tried to lean into Amal's glow, the more awkward she looked. The more Harry hovered, the more emasculated he appeared. Hollywood, like royalty, has an instinct for weakness. And weakness was dripping from the Sussexes that night. Let's pause and imagine the inner dialogue. Meghan, scanning the red carpet, thinking, if I can just get one photograph with Amal, it will change everything. One photo, and the tabloids will stop saying we're isolated. One smile from George, and it will prove we're still in the circle. Harry, perhaps thinking, if George acknowledges me, it will silence the whispers that I've been reduced to nothing more than Meghan's shadow. They were banking on validation. But validation never came. Instead, the whispers grew. Industry insiders noted Meghan's body language, her attempts to drift closer, her fixed smile when cameras turned elsewhere. They noted Harry's restlessness, his lack of purpose. It was the kind of spectacle people talk about behind closed doors, the kind of humiliation that spreads faster than applause. By the end of the night, the story wasn't Meghan and Harry shine at the film festival. It was Meghan and Harry snubbed, sidelined, ignored. Here's a question for you. Have you ever seen someone at a party try too hard to impress the host? It's uncomfortable, isn't it? You can feel the tension, the forced laughter, the overeager compliments. That's exactly how Meghan and Harry came across. The Clooneys didn't even need to say stay away. Their indifference spoke volumes. The Sussexes' effort to align themselves looked desperate, and that desperation only deepened their exile. And here's the contradiction. Meghan and Harry have access to incredible wealth, to their own platform, to their own mansion in Montecito. They don't need the Clooneys. They don't need the red carpet. But psychologically, emotionally, they crave it. They crave that validation because without it, their narrative crumbles. They sold themselves to the world as equals to Hollywood royalty. And when Hollywood royalty, like the Clooneys, rejects them, the illusion collapses. What makes this so devastating is that George and Amal didn't just ignore Meghan and Harry in private. They did it publicly, on one of the most visible stages in the entertainment calendar. That made the desperation not just personal, but global. Millions saw it. Millions will remember it. The Sussexes didn't just look out of place, they looked unwanted. And that's when Meghan made her most desperate move of the night. Eyewitnesses say she attempted to strike up a moment of conversation with Amal, mid-event, cameras rolling. Amal, ever the professional, responded with politeness, but not warmth. The difference was clear to anyone watching. It wasn't friendship. It was formality. And in Hollywood, formality is often the sharpest form of rejection. Can you imagine the sinking feeling Meghan must have had in that instant? Can you imagine Harry's humiliation, watching his wife stretch for validation only to be met with cool detachment? This wasn't just another evening gone wrong. It was a symbolic turning point. It was proof that the Sussexes were no longer central characters in the Hollywood story. They had become outsiders trying to claw their way back in. And yet, here's where the story twists even sharper. Because just when Meghan thought the night couldn't get more humiliating, George Clooney himself would make a move so subtle, yet so devastating that it left no doubt. The Sussexes' desperation had crossed a line. What George said next would become the ultimate rebuff, and it would leave Meghan reeling, Harry furious, and Hollywood buzzing with a message impossible to ignore. What could sting more than being ignored? Being told directly, whether in words or in gestures, that you are not welcome. That's exactly what unfolded in Chapter 5, Clooney's brutal rebuff. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was sharp, calculated, and public enough that Meghan and Harry couldn't mistake the meaning. Let's set the moment. The Clooneys had just swept through the flashing lights of the red carpet. Amal, glowing in perfection. George, every bit the charming Hollywood legend. The photographers had gotten their shots. The crowd had gotten their thrill. The Clooneys were poised to glide into the theater for the premiere. And then, it happened. Meghan and Harry made their move. Eyewitnesses described the scene as awkward, almost painful. Meghan, clutching Harry's arm tightly, attempted to close the distance, angling herself toward George and Amal as though she belonged in their orbit. This wasn't coincidence. This was choreography. Meghan wanted that photograph. She wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with Amal, to remind the world that she and Harry were still connected to Hollywood's most admired couple. But George Clooney saw it coming. And George Clooney, veteran of 1,000 red carpets, master of public optics, knew exactly how to handle it. He turned, just enough to acknowledge their presence. He smiled, just enough to avoid outright hostility. And then, with a subtle but unmistakable firmness, he shifted his body back toward Amal, placing his hand on her back, ushering her forward, away from Meghan and Harry. In that single gesture, the message was crystal clear: stay away from us. Can you picture the humiliation? Meghan, frozen in mid-step, her practiced smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Harry, stiff beside her, eyes darting nervously, realizing what had just happened. The cameras caught flashes of it, George's polite but distancing gesture, Amal gliding ahead, the Sussexes left in the wake. It wasn't a scene of friendship. It was a scene of exclusion. And here's where it gets even sharper. According to some insiders, George's words, spoken low but audible to those nearby, reinforced the message. Something along the lines of, "We'll catch up another time," delivered with that famous Clooney charm, but laced with finality. In Hollywood speak, that's code for, not tonight, not here, not with us. Now let's pause and consider the irony. George Clooney has defended Meghan in the past. In 2019, he criticized the British press for being relentless and cruel. He seemed, at the time, like an ally. But in 2025, standing on that red carpet, George's actions told a different story. What changed? The answer is obvious. Meghan and Harry changed. Back then, they were sympathetic. Now, they are synonymous with drama. To stand beside them is to inherit their controversies. For George, who has spent decades cultivating a reputation for dignity and wit, that's simply unacceptable. Think about it. George Clooney has nothing to gain by embracing Meghan and Harry in public. He already commands respect, attention, and influence. Associating with the Sussexes now risks headlines he doesn't want, whispers he doesn't need. And so, with the precision of a seasoned diplomat, he shut the door without ever raising his voice. That's the brutal beauty of a Clooney rebuff. It's delivered with a smile, but it cuts to the bone. Let's picture the scene again. The Clooneys are gliding along the carpet, Amal shimmering under the camera flashes. She's collected, serene, every strand of hair in place, every gesture deliberate. Meghan just steps away, is eager, almost frantic to be seen beside her. Meghan angles her body, her smile wide, her eyes darting toward Amal as if waiting for that nod of recognition, that beckoning gesture to step into the frame. But Amal never offers it. Not a glance, not a wave, not even the faintest flicker of acknowledgement. Instead, she looks past Meghan, as though she doesn't exist, her attention locked firmly on George, on the event, on the cameras that adored her. That moment of non-recognition was devastating. Because in Hollywood, and in high society, acknowledgement is currency. One glance can confirm a friendship. One smile can solidify an alliance. One photograph can resurrect a reputation. Amal withheld all of it. By pretending Meghan wasn't there, she erased her. Now pause and let that sink in. Amal Clooney didn't need to whisper stay away. She didn't need to push Meghan aside. She simply withheld recognition. And that silence was so much more powerful because it left Meghan exposed, stranded, visibly trying to attach herself to someone who had already moved on. And the crowd noticed. Paparazzi noticed. Journalists noticed. Viewers scrolling through Getty Images the next morning noticed. Side-by-side comparisons of Amal and Meghan began circulating online, and the difference was brutal. Amal was elegance, timelessness, gravitas. Meghan was painted as try-hard, strained, desperate for inclusion. In every frame, Amal's distance amplified Meghan's irrelevance. But here's the deeper cut. Amal isn't just a glamorous wife. She's a symbol of what Meghan once aspired to be. Meghan longed to be seen as more than a former actress, as an intellectual, a humanitarian, a woman admired for substance. That's exactly what Amal is. She has built a career arguing in the world's highest courts, standing beside survivors of genocide, challenging governments, defending freedom of speech. And she's done it without needing a Netflix series, a Spotify deal, or a constant cycle of interviews. Amal is what Meghan wants the world to believe Meghan is. And in that silent dismissal, Amal made the contrast painfully obvious. Imagine how that felt for Meghan. To stand within arm's reach of the woman she idolizes, the woman she once thought she could present as her peer, only to be ignored. To watch Amal command attention without saying a word, while Meghan strained and failed to reclaim relevance. It wasn't just exclusion, it was humiliation at the deepest, most personal level. Harry, too, must have felt the sting. Here was his wife, straining for validation, and the validation never came. Worse, Amal's silence drew more attention than a confrontation would have. If Amal had embraced Meghan, there would have been headlines celebrating reunited friends. If she had openly rejected her, Meghan could have spun it as cruelty. But by doing nothing, Amal robbed Meghan of both possibilities. No friendship, no feud, just indifference. And indifference is lethal. This is the power of social dynamics at the top. To be ignored by someone of Amal Clooney's stature is not neutral. It is destructive. It tells others in the room, this person doesn't matter. This person isn't worth my time. And others follow that cue. If Amal isn't engaging Meghan, why should anyone else? If Amal, respected universally, is stepping away, what message does that send to Hollywood? To political elites? To the fashion world? The message is clear. Meghan is on her own. Let's not underestimate how deliberate this was. Amal Clooney is no amateur. She understands optics better than almost anyone. She knows the weight her silence carries. Every movement she makes is precise. For her to glide past Meghan, to withhold acknowledgement in that setting, was intentional. She didn't want to be linked. She didn't want to offer Meghan even the illusion of association. And this brings us to a haunting irony. Meghan, who once sat at her royal wedding with Amal Clooney front and center, who once basked in the illusion of their connection, was now being cast out by that very same figure. It was a circle closing, a curtain falling. The message could not be clearer. Whatever existed then, it doesn't exist now. Now here's a question for you, the audience. What cuts deeper? A loud rejection or a silent one? Do you think Meghan would have preferred Amal to confront her directly, to say, "No, we're not friends anymore"? At least then, she could respond. She could frame herself as a victim. But silence offers no narrative to manipulate. Silence leaves you stranded, with nothing but your own humiliation. And that humiliation spread. In the hours and days after the event, commentators were merciless. Fashion critics praised Amal's effortless style while mocking Meghan's choices. Social media was flooded with comparisons, memes, brutal side-by-side images. Hashtags trended mocking Meghan's attempts to stand near Amal. And Meghan, who had once weaponized visibility, now found visibility turned against her. Here's the cruel paradox. Meghan chased validation through proximity. She wanted the world to see her beside Amal Clooney. And the world did see, but they saw the rejection. They saw the indifference. They saw the distance. Instead of elevating Meghan, Amal's silence annihilated her. Harry, too, couldn't escape the fallout. Once, he could have claimed brotherhood with George Clooney, camaraderie as men of influence. But that night, George was the one in command. Harry was the one left hanging. And Amal's silent glide away only reinforced Harry's diminished stature. If his wife was ignored, so was he. But here's the most chilling part. Amal's message wasn't just for Meghan. It wasn't just for Harry. It was for the entire elite audience watching. It was a signal: we are not with them. Do not mistake us as aligned. Do not associate us with their chaos. And in that world, signals like that are everything. Because what happened in the days after the red carpet proved the power of Amal's silence. Invitations dried up further. Industry insiders whispered louder. And Meghan realized the unthinkable. The woman she once idolized had quietly slammed the door forever. And yet, as devastating as Amal's silent message was, it was only the beginning of the backlash. Because what followed next wasn't just indifference. It was Hollywood itself taking sides. And when the whispers turned into actions, Meghan and Harry faced a reality they had long feared but never admitted. The rejection was no longer subtle. It was systemic. There are moments in celebrity culture when silence shifts into something louder, something more consequential. It starts with one or two whispers, then spreads into a chorus, and before long, the entire industry has quietly agreed on one unspoken truth: you are no longer welcome. That is exactly what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry experienced in the days and weeks following the Clooneys' silent but brutal distancing on the New York Film Festival red carpet. What began as an awkward snub by George and Amal transformed into something much bigger: a Hollywood backlash that would define the Sussexes' place in the entertainment world for years to come. Let's take a step back. Hollywood is not kind, nor is it forgiving. It thrives on image, perception, and the currency of social capital. Who you are seen with matters as much as what you achieve. Who invites you to their parties, whose premieres you attend, whose arms you link with on the red carpet. All of these things send messages far louder than press releases ever could. When George and Amal Clooney publicly, unmistakably distanced themselves from Meghan and Harry, it wasn't just a one-off snub. It was a signal, and Hollywood heard it. Think about it. If even George and Amal, the epitome of class, grace, and global respect, decided to walk away, what did that say to the rest of Hollywood's elite? If the Clooneys were drawing a line, why would anyone else take the risk of aligning with Meghan and Harry? No one wants to be the last friend standing when the tide has already turned. That's how Hollywood works. It feeds on trends, and when a downfall begins, it accelerates quickly. Almost immediately, the ripple effects became clear. Meghan and Harry found that their names were missing from the most exclusive guest lists. The after-parties they once assumed they'd be included in. Suddenly, the invitations never arrived. High-profile charity galas where Meghan expected to walk arm in arm with influential figures. Their names were, regrettably, not on the list. It wasn't open hostility. It was worse. It was polite exclusion. The kind that leaves you guessing, wondering, doubting yourself. Yet everyone around you knows exactly what's going on. Here's where the irony deepens. Meghan had always painted herself as a Hollywood insider, someone who belonged to the world of glitz and glamour long before she ever married into royalty. Yet, after leaving the royal family, she had staked everything on being embraced as a hybrid of both worlds, royal gravitas and Hollywood relevance. But now, stripped of her royal platform and cut off from Hollywood's embrace, She found herself stranded in the middle, too controversial for the royals, too risky for the elites. And Hollywood thrives on optics. The image of George Clooney gently guiding Amal forward while leaving Meghan standing awkwardly behind spread faster than any official press release. Clips of the red carpet moment were replayed online, analyzed by body language experts, dissected by tabloids. Social media amplified the humiliation. Memes mocked Meghan's attempt to inch closer. Side-by-side comparisons highlighted Amal's effortless elegance versus Meghan's forced smile. Hashtags trended, some cruel, some mocking, all cutting. By the next morning, it wasn't just a red carpet snub. It was a symbol of Meghan and Harry's collapse in Hollywood. But let's not pretend this was only about perception. There were real consequences behind the scenes, in boardrooms and production offices. Executives who had once entertained the idea of working with the Sussexes began pulling back. Too much baggage, some whispered. The Clooneys don't touch them. Why should we? The collapse of their Spotify deal had already rattled industry confidence. Their Netflix projects were faltering. Now, with Hollywood's most respected couple signaling rejection, the Sussexes were becoming untouchable. And here's the contradiction that makes it sting even more. Meghan had claimed she didn't need Hollywood. She insisted she was building something different, something independent. Yet, every move she made, the Netflix series, the glossy magazine covers, the attempted proximity to Amal Clooney, proved otherwise. She needed Hollywood. She craved its validation. And when Hollywood collectively turned its back, her desperation only became more visible. For Harry, the backlash was equally brutal. He had never belonged to Hollywood in the first place. His strength was once in his royal identity, his military service, his global charity work. But after stepping into Meghan's world, he was judged by Hollywood standards, and he couldn't measure up. To industry insiders, he wasn't charismatic enough, wasn't media savvy enough, wasn't adaptable enough to survive in the cutthroat world of celebrity culture. With George Clooney, a man Harry once admired, brushing him off, Harry's awkwardness and lack of belonging became glaringly obvious. Now, let's ask the question, what does Hollywood fear most? Controversy? No, controversy sells. What it fears is dead weight. People who drag others down, who make an event about their drama rather than their presence. That's how Meghan and Harry began to be seen. Their presence no longer elevated a room, it complicated it. Why risk inviting them when the Clooneys, the Obamas, the Spielbergs, the Oprah Winfreys of the world were already signaling they wanted no part of it? The backlash wasn't always loud. It didn't need to be. In Hollywood, the quiet exclusion is deadlier than the public fight. Meghan could have spun a loud feud with Amal into sympathy, could have painted herself as a victim of cruelty. But indifference? Indifference cannot be spun. And indifference was what Amal gave her, and what the rest of Hollywood soon followed. And here's the most haunting part. Meghan knows this pattern. She saw it in the royal family. At first, she was embraced. Then, when her controversies mounted, the royals stepped back. Eventually, she was isolated. Now, the same pattern repeats in Hollywood. Initial curiosity, followed by proximity, followed by exhaustion, followed by quiet exile. It's as if the very script she wanted to escape in the palace has followed her across the Atlantic. But here's the cliffhanger that makes this even more brutal. Just when Meghan and Harry thought the red carpet snub and its ripple effects were the worst of it, one powerful Hollywood insider would confirm their deepest fear, that the Clooneys' rebuff was not an isolated moment. It was the opening act of something bigger, a systemic closing of doors across the entire industry. And when that confirmation came, it wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was delivered so clearly, so unmistakably, that Meghan and Harry could no longer deny what was happening. The walls of Hollywood weren't just closing in, they were slamming shut. The Clooneys' red carpet moment at Lincoln Center should have been just another dazzling night of Hollywood spectacle, the kind of fleeting event that makes headlines for a day before vanishing into the endless churn of celebrity news. But when George and Amal so visibly, so gracefully distanced themselves from Meghan and Harry, the story refused to die. Instead, it caught fire. By morning, it wasn't just whispers in elite circles anymore. It had exploded into a full-blown media frenzy, and the coverage was brutal. The tabloids had a field day. Clooney snubbed the Sussexes, screamed one headline. Amal ignores Meghan, blared another. Paparazzi photos were dissected like forensic evidence. Analysts zoomed in on body language. George's polite but firm turn away, Amal's eyes fixed firmly ahead, Meghan leaning ever so slightly in their direction but left hanging in the cold. Clips of the moment played on loop across morning shows, gossip panels, and online blogs. What might have been dismissed as coincidence quickly became the defining narrative of the night. And the memes. Oh, the memes. Twitter, or X, as it's now branded, was merciless. Side-by-side images comparing Amal's glowing elegance with Meghan's strained smile flooded timelines. Jokes about Meghan reaching for the A-list only to get ghosted trended for hours. Harry wasn't spared either. His awkward stance and uncertain expression became fodder for captions like, "When you realize you're not the main character anymore." Cruel? Yes. But viral? Absolutely. What's important here isn't just the laughter or the mockery. It's the shift in narrative. For years, Meghan and Harry had controlled their story. Through carefully curated interviews, documentaries, and public appearances, they cast themselves as victims of an unfair system, brave truth-tellers carving a new path. But in the wake of the Clooneys' red carpet dismissal, that control slipped. They were no longer the authors of their own story. The media had taken over, and the framing was unforgiving. The Sussexes were desperate, irrelevant, and rejected. Now let's step into the press rooms for a moment. Editors thrive on conflict, on sharp contrasts. And the Clooneys versus the Sussexes offered the perfect story arc. One couple adored, respected, thriving. The other couple scorned, sidelined, mocked. It was irresistible. Coverage became less about the film festival itself and more about the social drama it revealed. Articles framed the Clooney silence as the final nail in the coffin of Meghan and Harry's Hollywood ambitions. TV pundits debated whether this was the beginning of the end for the Sussex brand. Overnight, Meghan and Harry weren't just celebrities. They were a cautionary tale. But let's ask the real question. Why did the frenzy take off so aggressively? The answer lies in the pent-up resentment of both the public and the press. Many felt exhausted by years of Sussex narratives. The endless interviews, the bombshells that often landed with a whimper, the victimhood paired with luxury. People were ready to pounce on a story that punctured Meghan and Harry's self-image. The Clooneys' graceful rejection provided the perfect trigger. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. And the media turned that subtle moment into a firestorm. Here's the irony. Meghan once weaponized the press. She knew how to drop carefully chosen quotes, how to use sympathetic journalists to amplify her grievances, how to frame every setback as another example of injustice. But this time, she had no control. The images spoke louder than her words ever could. No interview could erase the footage of Amal gliding past her. No PR spin could explain away George turning his back. The press didn't need Meghan's version of events. They had their own, and it sold. And Harry? He became collateral damage in the frenzy. Commentators dissected his posture, his expression, his apparent lack of agency. Was he a man embarrassed? Was he simply resigned? Headlines painted him as lost, out of place, the prince without a kingdom or a clique. For a man who once commanded global admiration, the portrayal was devastating. The frenzy didn't just mock Meghan. It undermined Harry's dignity too. But here's where the frenzy cut even deeper. It reached beyond tabloids and gossip blogs. Mainstream outlets joined in. Respected newspapers ran features on the Sussexes' diminishing influence. Opinion pieces asked whether their Hollywood experiment had failed. Even late-night comedians, who once joked lightly about the royals, turned their monologues toward the Sussexes' humiliation. When comedy, tabloids, and mainstream news all align on one narrative, you know it's penetrated the cultural bloodstream. And Meghan felt it. Sources whispered about her frustration in the days following the event. Angry phone calls to advisors, frantic brainstorming on how to flip the narrative. But nothing worked. The memes kept coming. The headlines kept biting. The frenzy had momentum, and Meghan couldn't stop it. Worse, every attempt to counter it only fed the story further. The harder she tried to push back, the more the press painted her as desperate. So what does this tell us? It tells us that Meghan and Harry's worst fear had come true. They had lost control. For celebrities, for royals, for anyone in the public eye, control of the narrative is everything. Without it, you become a caricature, a punchline, a storyline written by others. And for Meghan, who once prided herself on her ability to manage her image, the loss of control was catastrophic. Now here's the question for you, the audience. Was this frenzy inevitable? Or was it triggered solely by that red carpet moment? Did the media seize the Clooney snub because it fit a narrative they'd been waiting to unleash, that Meghan and Harry weren't glamorous rebels anymore, but outcasts clinging to relevance? Because the frenzy didn't stop at headlines and jokes. It began to seep into decisions, real decisions, being made in the corridors of power in Hollywood. And when those decisions were revealed, Meghan and Harry realized the backlash wasn't just about perception anymore. It was about opportunity, and opportunities were vanishing.